Continuing to look back at 2015, debates over education reform dominated local and national headlines as citizens in Jefferson County initiated a contentious school board recall election. Conservative school board members Ken Witt, Julie Williams, and John Newkirk were ousted in a November recall, and conservative incumbents on the Douglas County School Board also lost re-election bids. David, this was a big deal in November. We had school board elections throughout the state that saw changes just like this one, but Jeffco was certainly the highest profile, along with Douglas County here in Colorado, but Jeffco made national headlines. As we look back, what are your thoughts?
The empire strikes back, and quite successfully. The unions, especially the National Education Association, they were outstanding at community organization. And when you think about, spending in these races, and you focus, well, how much did people put into television ads and things like that in the October beforehand? That's a drop in the bucket to where the real important spending happened. After the pro-reform slate was elected in Jeffco and elsewhere in 2014, the unions moved in, we don't even know how many, maybe over 100, dozens at least, of organizers, and they did a great job. They did among the ways that they did a great job was they stayed below the radar, and they organized and they agitated, but they weren't out front. But they got local people activated to go out front and be the face of the movement, of the anti-reform movement. To some degree, certainly on the Jeffco board, and Julie Williams were the greatest own goal in Colorado politics this year, at least, on that stupid complaint, proposal she had about about history, which never got adopted. But and other places, people were, I think, some voters were objecting less to particular reforms than they were saying, oh, there's all this contention and things like that, and why can't school board politics be nicer and more sedate? And so they lashed out and voted against the incumbents, although in fact a lot of the agitation and controversy and lack of civility was created by the outside agitators from the national unions coming in and doing a great job. But they did a great job, and if you want to give the award for best, most effective political work in Colorado in 2015, I think it unquestionably goes to the D.C. headquarters of the National Education Association.
Eric, until probably 2014, we were used to, as a community, of seeing school board races being very sleepy. You'd really have to be into politics to even know who was running. Now, 2015 seemed to give them a really big boost. Do you think that will continue, that people will become much more familiar and aware of what's going on in school boards?
Yeah, I think the trend may have started a little before 2014, but certainly if you go back into the early part of the 2000s and way before that, these were very sedate, quiet affairs. Community leaders would put their hand in the air and say, I'll take on this obligation, I'll take on this duty. And everyone said, thank you very much, and went about their business. Just as the rest of our political system has become so polarized and operates at full volume and full throttle all the time, that has now spilled over into the education realm. And the education wars have become very heated, and that Colorado is not unique in this regard. Jeffco was particularly hot, and Jeffco was a national epicenter of this, but Colorado is not unique. And you see these wars going on around the country, and there's a lot of nonsense spouted all around. The notion that charter schools are somehow not public schools or whatever that people spout is a part of this. While the pendulum clearly swung this last November in Jeffco and Douglas County, up in Loveland and other places, there's one place where the pendulum did not swing, and that's right here in Denver, where what is now a 10-year or longer record, first under Superintendent Michael Bennett, now under Tom Boasberg, of a very reform, choice-oriented district, that has now been ratified in election after an election, and those forces enjoy a 7-0 majority now on that school board. I'm going to be curious to see whether that Denver model, policy model, not political model, policy model, can at some point in time be exported to the Auroras and Jefferson counties and et cetera, a lot of the other inner ring suburbs around Denver. There used to be this notion that lousy crappy schools and urban poverty were Denver phenomenon. Denver itself is gentrifying very quickly in front of our eyes, and a lot of these problematic school systems are now in those inner ring suburbs. That's where the action needs to be. That's where the focus needs to be. And I'm going to be curious over the next handful of years whether some of that model can be exported.
Penn, what are your thoughts on what we saw with both the Jeffco race, Douglas County, and really just the whole idea around school boards this year?
Well, contrary to David's take on this, it was actually Return of the Jedi. And what occurred is I think for both Jeffco, Douglas, and Denver, there is a theme that folks aren't talking about yet, but it's becoming more prevalent. I think throughout this state, throughout this country, people are saying fundamentally, K-12 education in America is a complete do-over. That the model we have has outlived its usefulness for the technology-based society of today. We've got to do things radically different. And because of the political partisan bickering, and I think it is partisan bickering, although these elections are theoretically nonpartisan, people aren't focusing on the core issue, which is get kids a better education so they can compete in an increasingly globalized economy and world. Jefferson County, I think what simply happened there, and we've talked about it before, is sometimes how you treat people is more important than what you do. The personalities drove that entire recall election, not necessarily the value or the merits of some of the policy decisions they made. And so it didn't become a question of whether you agreed or disagreed in every instance with the policy. Really, the resounding chorus is, we don't like these folks. They treat us badly, they're rude to us, they're abrupt, we got to get rid of them, and oh, by the way, they made these decisions that we think are dumb. Douglas was a little different, and we've got to be careful about terminology, because I think Douglas and Denver reflects that. Reform agenda is relative. If you think a certain way, the other person's point of view is going to be cast as reform. And if you disagree with them, your agenda is reform, to the point where the word almost has no meaning in the context of some of these school elections. I think in Douglas County, for better or for worse, I think there the members behaved better, but I think the voters felt you're just going in a policy direction we don't want to go, and it may not be enough. Caution about Denver, and I appreciate what Eric said, but the thing to watch with Denver Public Schools is in many ways the disparate voices helped the Denver Public Schools, because now you have a situation, you're right, Denver's gentrifying, but you see story after story about the resegregation of Denver Public Schools. That is going to have a ripple effect through conversations and elections moving forward. Although Denver has a 7-0 sort of groupthink board now, remember the president of the school board, Happy Haynes, didn't know until the next day whether she won against someone who no one ever heard of before, but she almost lost her re-election bid. So that tells you that the dissatisfaction with public schools, I think, is deep-seated, and it's far more complex than whether you get to tell yourself you're the reform candidate or the other person says it. This is going to be interesting to watch, because I think these school board elections are going to be more and more problematic as we move forward.
Patty, 2015 was reading, writing, and recalls. Your take?
Well, it's not a surprise that school board elections are no longer sleepy little elections, because parents feel empowered to get really involved in their kids' educations. These are not people who grew up in the 50s and believed the authority figures knew what they were doing. I mean, parents are peeved and they are going to take a very active role. But if we are talking about, let's return to the Star Wars analogy. Julie Witz in Jeffco was Jar Jar Binks. Are you? I mean, this is not someone who was hypnotized by the National Education Association to act like an idiot. She did it all on her own. And her fellow board members were not much better. So they were like the people in the Star Wars bar. So that they were not popular, that people went against them because they wanted to be treated with even a modicum of respect. Of course that's what happened. I mean, this was not so much about the policies, it was about how people were treated. And I'm glad that the kids in Jefferson County, let's hope they paid attention, got a real civics lesson this year.
The Disney Star Wars marketing machine is so incredible that they can even get it to the Colorado Inside Out table. I am so impressed that it is.
It's a generational thing.
It really is.